you're such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a survived story about 6 boys who were shipwrecked on a deserted island. Now, although this isn't necessarily foul play like this month's theme, as soon as I heard about this case, I had to share it. A survival story that shows you the good in humanity, something I think we all need right now. However, it wouldn't be a true survival story without some darkness and tragedy as well. Now, I also want to thank our sponsor, Care of, and these little vitamin packets have been a complete lifesaver. I am in the middle of doing this whole month-long series as well as moving, and so I have been a little bit busy, and these have really helped me to make sure I'm still taking care of myself and my health. Now, Care of makes it so easy to get your daily supply of supplements by just grabbing the adorable daily packet and heading out. You get a customized assortment as well by taking the 5-minute online quiz that asks questions about your lifestyle and health, both mental and physical. Then, once you approve the supplements you want, they're sent straight to your door, and Care of makes it super easy to take better care of yourself. And they are also extremely transparent with the ingredients within the vitamins you are taking, and they give you a little pamphlet that lists them all out. Now, this is what I'm currently taking to help my skin, mind, heart, and energy, and every day I also get to read the adorable little prompts on the front of the eco-friendly packaging. So if you would like to take the quiz to find out what Care of recommends to you, the link will be down below in the description box, and you just have to click it and it will take you right there. And also, if you would like 50% off your first order, all you have to do is use code BROOKEM. So if you want 50% off, use code BROOKEM. And thank you to Care of for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1965 on the small islands of Tonga, and a group of boys were in school at St. Andrew's Anglican Boarding School. Pronunciations of their names might be a little off. I'm trying my best. Now, this was Sion Fatua and Stephen Kolo Fakatoa. And these boys were all 17 years old. And then there were 16-year-olds Mano Totoya and Luke Vascoa. And there was also Tavita, who was 15. Now, all these young boys were between the ages of 15 and 19. And by June, they were beginning to get restless at school and wanted a better life elsewhere. That's when they came up with a plan. They were going to borrow a boat and sail to New Zealand, which was about 5 hours away by plane, which meant it was going to take even longer by boat. But they were determined to have a better life, and that's exactly what they did. They took a 25-foot whaling boat and they were on their way. They stocked up with 2 sacks of bananas, a few coconuts, and a small gas burner. However, they didn't bring water and they didn't bring any other supplies. And that is when everything turned against them. You see, high winds began while they were out in the middle of nowhere, and it broke the mast, it damaged the boat, and immediately everything was torn up into pieces. They had no rudders or no sails. It made it impossible to steer the boat in any direction. In fact, they were just drifting for about 8 days. They were slowly running out of food and water, and no more rain was even coming down to be able to collect it to drink. They began praying to God, believing that only God could save them at this point. But meanwhile, their families had no idea what happened to them. They had all just disappeared. No one had seen them leave. And after about 6 months of these boys being gone, just vanishing out of thin air with no sign of their return, their families began to hold funerals for them. They were mourning the loss of their children. They couldn't have imagined that their boys would have survived out in the open water alone for so long. However, that's exactly what had happened. But Sion's father actually never believed he was dead, refused to have a funeral, and knew that his son had survived somehow, some way. 6 months later, a boat showed up back in Tonga with all 6 boys alive and well. And they were reunited with their families, and Sion's father had been right. They were still alive, and not only just alive, they were somehow healthy and fit. So what exactly happened to them between those 6 months that they vanished off the face of the earth to everyone who knew them? Well, many believed that they knew the story because it was the plot of a book that had come out 11 years prior. It seemed like this book had almost predicted the future. This was a book called Lord of the Flies, and it came out in 1954 by William Golding. Now, I know that a lot of schools make you read this book for the English curriculum, at least in America, so this is a book that is widely known. But it is actually about a group of British boys who are also stranded on a desert island in the middle of nowhere. And they end up turning against each other, and they're attempting to survive, but they're doing it very badly, and it gets dark and rough. And this is a book that is supposed to show that humans need rules. They need authority in order for everyone to be safe and to survive that. That basically living in total freedom would be chaos. And 11 years later, 6 boys were put in this exact situation, except they were about to prove William Golding wrong, that the only way to survive would be to turn against each other and to fight for that survival. Because these boys, they had fallen asleep on this boat, and they awoke to the storm that was taking over the boat, was ripping it to pieces, that savaged the entire boat. And after 8 days of drifting on the open ocean, the boys finally saw land. However, it wasn't land they ever had seen before. They also couldn't do anything to stop their boat from crashing into the sharp and jagged rocks along the shore, and their boat jammed right into them and turned basically into pieces. However, all 6 boys were able to get to shore safely, and they were all extremely surprised they had even made it that far. They were finally on land, but they were also very exhausted from lack of sustenance, and they had been living on adrenaline and fear for 8 days now. However, they would soon realize that they couldn't let their guard down just yet. None of these boys knew where they were. They had never seen this land before. None of them could tell if they were close to home or not, and it also appeared that the land was completely deserted and only had a few different kinds of birds still living there. Even though these boys knew how to work with their hands, they knew how to gather food, they weren't completely at a loss as far as that. They were also stranded on this beach that was down below the actual island. You see, there was like a little mountain hill that they needed to climb that they couldn't do just yet because they didn't have the energy to. Over and over again, the boys were trying to climb the side and they would just continue to fall back down. So they began to make a small ridge under this hill, their home, and they put rocks up on one side so the water that couldn't get in, and they could also be protected from the sun. But the problem now was they needed food and fast, or they were not going to survive the next few days. These boys weren't letting the situation get to them though. Even though they feared that they would never return home, they were grateful for what they had in the moment. All 6 of them knew that if they hadn't crashed their boat onto this island, they would have died in the boat with no food and no water. And now they had the opportunity to catch their own food. And so they started going after some of the birds. They used their hunting skills to gather them and eat them and their eggs that they could find. And they also ventured into the water to see how many fish they could get. The only problem was they didn't have any equipment and they couldn't make a fire. So they had to eat these things raw. By this point, though, they didn't care. They were just happy to have something to eat. They were using hollowed out logs to catch rainwater to be able to drink. And if they also didn't have enough water to drink, they were drinking the blood from the birds. At this point, they couldn't be picky. They had to do what was necessary and keep themselves afloat until they could get up that mountain. All they could do was hunt and keep busy to keep themselves from thinking about their home, their families, what they had done, who they had lost. But when they all sat down together, they actually only talked about hope and that there would be a boat that would come and get them and rescue them, would see them, and they would be able to return home. And with 6 teenage boys who were afraid and angry about what happened to them, who were blaming themselves, this could have gone horribly wrong. They could have started turning against each other, fighting for the food, for the birds. They could have been attacking each other and ultimately using each other for food when there was no more. But this wasn't even a possibility in their heads. They had an unspeakable bond, one that was unbreakable no matter the circumstances. They said that this was because of where they had come from, that all of their families were poor and they basically had to rely on each other, the different families of the community, to survive just on an everyday basis. Whatever they got, they shared. And so this is how they had always lived. It wasn't something that they had to get used to. So it was no different on the island. It just was even more necessary. Then, after what seemed like a lifetime on the island on the shore, the boys finally had enough strength to climb. And that's exactly what they did. This was after 100 days and they finally were headed up. Now, it took them 2 days trying multiple different paths to get to the top, and this time they made it. They were extremely excited to have a whole new environment, to have new places to explore, possibly new food, and they spread out searching, yet the only thing that they could really find was coconuts and a few knives left behind. They could see that civilization had once lived here, but they were not there anymore. They knew this because while they were walking, they found bones in the dirt that had been buried, and this was of a human. Now, knowing that this could be their fate one day, the boys decided to rebury the bones to respectfully dispose of the dead that they had uncovered, and they also prayed over the body. But whoever had been there prior had actually left them with an abundance of food. There were chickens, taro, pineapples, bananas, coconuts, and these were things that were a luxury to these boys at this point. Now, they hunted by day and they prayed by night, asking God to keep them alive. Sayona Fatua became more of the leader of the group, and he made a promise to God that if he was spared, he would basically work for him the rest of his life, and he would really dedicate himself to God. And Sayona helped the other boys as being kind of their spiritual counselor as well, to make sure that the boys still had this life about them and had a light within them. At this point, they were also able to light a fire after one of the boys remembered that he knew how to do so, and so it took hours, but they finally had this fire, and after this, they never let it die. There was constantly boys on watch, putting wood in the fire to make it sure that it did not die on them, because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to do it again. The first night that they made it up on top of this island, they had a buffet with all of the animals that they could find, as well as beans and fruit, and it was the first hot meal that they had had in 3 months. Before they allowed themselves to eat, though, they were singing songs that they had written, and they also prayed to God and thanked him for the food they were given. Now, hearing this beautiful song full of hope and gratefulness in this time where these boys could have been scared out of their mind and were scared out of their mind is such a magical sound. Oh my God. Now, Kolo was actually the musician of the group, and he created a little guitar out of coconuts, wood, and strings from the boat. It was incredible what he could do with things that he had just found, and he could also tune it as well, and he was always playing it to bring up everyone's spirits with music.
Sometimes boring, and his guitar make it with a shell of a coconut and a piece of timber, and this a string, that's a wire. Found it from the boat, from the beach.
And the timber? Where did you find the timber?
The timber from the boat.
From the wreck?
Yeah.
And what is that?
And that's the key. That's a little piece of wood.
And it's possible to make it more tight?
Yeah.
You still remember your song, Kolo?
Yes. Kutala noa e ni ki he anga o e polua. Ia lopai ngā taa o hake ki uta. Mo e whakalilifu o e ongo mo umu. Ka halasi a te la ka guredo i moana. Aho e ne puli pia ni ta e ilo. Si e te kai moin alo i fofonga. I foki a te kita ai ma te ki whaetoka. E te nofo hopoa te i he motu ta e ilo. A si e te tanin whai mui he wawa. Ka koloto si a utu te lehagea. Ani ui gihita e hamai. One toko ni si oku mamahi.
They would all also work together to write songs to be able to sing so they wouldn't get bored of the ones they knew. And these boys had everything taken from them. They weren't sure if they were ever going to get it back, but they didn't lay down and succumb to their pain. They continued to fight and to thrive as well. Eventually, they realized that the trees on this island, some of them were full of water, meaning they no longer had to scavenge or wait for rainfall. They had an abundance of water that would keep them hydrated. In fact, they would dig for 4 days into the trunks to get this water, and it was like magic once they found it. Once the food and the water was taken care of, the next thing they wanted to do was to build shelter. They were making this stranded, scary island their home. And so they used bushes and palm trees to braid together a roof and walls to put around them. And soon enough, the scary island wasn't so scary anymore. Every night, the boys would come back together after hunting, gathering, whatever they were doing, or just playing. They would have, oftentimes they would go out and just play some sports, but they would all come together at night to eat around the fire together. They would talk about what they did each day. They would talk to each other like they were a family, like they were just coming in from their days and wanted to express what had happened. If anyone had something going on in their head, something they didn't like that was happening, something that was bothering them, they all talked about it. And if someone was super angry, they actually just took a breather, went off into the woods to collect themselves before coming back. They didn't do any punishments or exiles. They said sorry. They practiced forgiveness, and it was so beautiful. They didn't turn one boy away or fight for who was in charge. They worked together. They made sure that everyone felt like they were part of this family and no one felt unheard. They were working together to make gardens, to even put together a makeshift gym so they could stay strong and healthy. And they were playing sports like tennis and boxing that they literally created from things they had on the island. They wanted to make sure that they didn't get weak and just let nature beat them. They needed to stay strong and healthy if they were going to survive here. 6 months on the island, and all the boys had their routines. Some stayed at home with the fire, some went and hunted, others cooked, others created traps. However, it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows, because life never is. And in a situation like this, there's bound to be trouble. See, one day when Mano and Stephen were hunting birds, Stephen fell 40 feet down a mountain onto a ledge, and when the others found out, they went and searched for him. They found him, they carried him back up, and they realized he had a broken leg. There was no medical assistance here. There was no hospital to go to. They used hot coconut to try to heal it, and they made him, of course, sit down, not do any work, and slowly it did heal. There was a scar, but he was okay. And then another day, near their camp, a tree actually fell down in a storm so close to them it could have crushed and killed so many. But thankfully, it was just near their camp. Then some of the boys were trying to build a raft. After they had built their shelter, they went on to build a raft to see if they could make it home. However, once they put this in the water, it rammed into the rocks just like their boat had and completely crashed into a million pieces. Even though they had made this island their home, it didn't stop them from wanting to go back to their original home, to their family. They didn't originally want to turn around because they would have gotten in trouble for stealing the boat that they had taken. But at this point, they just wanted to see their loved ones. And they tried to keep track of the days that were going by as best as they could. They tried to remember their loved ones. And after 15 months, a year and 3 months, it was September 11th of 1966. And these boys were going about their normal routine when they started screaming to each other that a boat was coming. They began shouting and running towards the shore and to the water, and they dove into the water. They began swimming towards this boat, trying to get help. This boat was called Just David, and these boys were naked. They were screaming at the top of their lungs, and they were all together. And they started climbing up the ladder of this boat that they had just come to. Their wildest dream was coming true. They could be rescued. It turned out that this captain was an Australian man who was looking for new crayfish grounds, and his name was Peter Warner. Now, he was eager to hear their story upon seeing that they were all entering his boat, and he was amazed by them and the fact that they had basically created a mini civilization on this island so young. They were also given clothes at this point and given a meal, unlike any they had had in a very long time. Peter said he was more than willing to take them back to Tonga, but he also called the media in Sydney, Australia, to get reporters to this island to capture the reunion of the boys to their families, which is why we have that footage today. However, because everybody knew these boys were coming, it caused some chaos, because if you remember, the boys had stolen the boat they had taken to the island, and as soon as they got back to Tonga, they were captured and arrested because the owner had pressed charges against them. At the same time, Peter Warner, who had helped them come home, was throwing a party for them on the island, and then he realized they weren't there, and then he caught news that they had been arrested, and he went to help them get released. He paid the owner for the boat in full, and then he said that the boys were going to participate in a film about their survival to help pay for what they had done. And these boys said that they didn't feel any different between those 6 months of leaving and coming home, and so they felt a little odd that everybody was looking at them like they were so different, and they were mostly just worried that no one would remember them. This was obviously not the case, though, because for the next 3 days, celebrations were held all over the island just for them. It was a constant party, one right after another, with singing, dancing, and food. The boys were also checked out by a doctor who was amazed by their physical strength and overall health that they had done all themselves, that they had committed to making sure that they were okay. And there was even the perfectly healed leg of the boy who had broken his leg on the island. It turned out that the island that they had been stranded on was named Atta, and it was only 100 miles away from Tonga. It was actually settled on in the Middle Ages, and about 300 people had once lived there. But that is when a Tasmanian captain named Thomas McGrath had been searching for whales to capture and sell, and he couldn't find any. That's when he began to hunt humans to sell on the slave markets in Peru. And that's when he came upon Atta. This was so disturbing that a man like Thomas could do this, and even more disturbing when he found out that when he was 16, he had been deported and ripped away from his home as well, and now he was doing that to other people. They found Atta, they took half the population with them. They had offered them food on their ship, and of course these people wanted to be nice and wanted the food, and so they went into the ship, and then they were locked inside. The Tonga king then took the rest of the population. So it turned out that how the boys had thought that these individuals of the island had, died just slowly trickling out was not true. They had been captured and taken. But it was said that these people of Atta did not do well as slaves. They were ripped away from their communities. They were put at homes with masters, and they were almost immediately dying. And it was said this was so strange, but it was because they felt like community was everything to them. It was why they lived, and it was hard to live without it. When asked why he did this, Thomas said that he was the victim. And it's still unknown where all of these people went, all of the people of Atta. It's believed that how the people of Atta lived before they were taken, the things they did together, the community they had, made them strong, was why they were dying so quickly, because it was so strong that they refused to live without it. They weren't weak. They had figured out what true, pure humanity felt like and wanted nothing else but that. That's what is truly believed to have kept the boys alive as well when they entered this island. And somehow the animals on this island had survived those 100 years and helped the Tongan castaways to be able to have food to eat, because without it, they wouldn't have survived. So even though these people of Atta had been turned into slaves, they had their hand in helping these 6 boys as well. And their memories, their legacy should not be lost in vain. These boys did end up going back to Atta to film the documentary on what happened to them, and they also said they hoped that Atta could be inhabited by people, by their people at one point. And Kolo's last wish before he passed was actually to revisit Atta one more time after that. And so in 2015, his wish was granted by a Spanish explorer named Alvarez Carrezo, and he also filmed a documentary. Now, unfortunately, Kolo has since passed away. Sion and Luke are actually probably the closest and had since moved in together in California, and they're both in their 70s now. Now, Sion actually grew up to be a head pastor, and Luke was a heavyweight boxing champion. They both, along with Tavita and Mano, are the 4 remaining survivors, and they actually gave Hollywood studio New Regency the movie rights to their story. Now, Mano had actually been traveling around the world with Peter Warner, the boy or the man who was the captain of the boat that picked them up, and so Mano kind of just works with him now as a member of the crew and has since been turned into a captain.
We've just decided to reenact some of our old trips and also help us prepare for the next eternal voyage. At the age of 35, I found Mano marooned on an island where he'd been with his teenage mates for 2 years, and took him back to his home island where they had all been given up for dead and funeral services had been held. And so I got to know the families very well. That led to a long friendship and a lot of work around the Pacific. When I decided to move to the Kingdom of Tonga, I recruited Mano as one of the crew of my fishing boats. But he rose up to become a captain of his own accord, and I feel happy that I had something to do with his tutoring.
It's like a father, and it's making it really deep to me in heart. Feel happy and nice to be together again and see.
Siona says that he's waited 54 years for their story to become famous, and he said, if people today had the mindset of these 6 Tongan castaways, if we all help each other, not to be greedy, care for each other, we can all survive what is happening in the world. Now, some have said that this story is often told as kind of a white savior story, that these natives were rescued by this white man who got all of the recognition, and that is the last thing I want to do, and I hope I did not do, because I truly believe it was the boys who saved themselves. Yes, this man came by in a boat, but many boats could have come by, and it could have been any kind of race that saved them technically with this boat, but they worked together. These boys did. They decided they were going to live, and they were healthy and aware enough to be able to see this boat and to swim to it, no matter who it was. These boys were their own heroes. And to me, this is a story of community, of self-preservation, of strength, but also of love. Because these boys loved each other so dearly that they didn't want anything to happen to even one of them. They didn't leave one man behind, no matter what, even if it would have made things easier. This story is incredibly beautiful to me. One of the most incredible stories I have ever heard. And Siona's right. If we all treated each other like they treated each other in bad times, this world would be a much better place. We could all survive anything that came our way because we would know that we all had each other's back. We didn't have to fight for survival because we would know that somebody else would fight for us if we didn't have enough strength. So do you think you'd be able to survive something like this? Is it possible for all of us to live like the people of Ata did? Because I think that they had the right idea about community, about love, about family, and about living in general. Do you think it's possible that our world could ever live like that? Would you want to live in a world like that? Because I know I would. But I know this isn't technically a true crime story, but I thought it was so beautiful, so inspirational, and it just is something the world needs occasionally, and especially on this channel where we talk about such dark things. I wanted to give you a sense of hope and a sense of there are good people in the world. There is a way of living that isn't so dark and desperate and angry and selfish, because these boys were anything but that. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.